One of the things that to be remembered in while dealing with Bhimayan is its title also, right? So we've been talking about the idea of Bhimayan and the narrative of it. If you look at Bhimayan, uh, how we pronounce it makes for two meanings at least. So we have Bhimayan sounding also like Navayan, Navayana, Bhimayana, Navayana being the new form of Buddhism that he subscribes to and thinks of as a space which is outside Hinduism, which is not discriminatory towards the Dalits, and Navayana is also the imprint which is publishing this book itself, right? So Bhimayan and Navayan find a certain kind of echoes in each other in that way. And also we are told, as we discussed, Ambedkar's narrative ends with the representative figure of Buddha himself and his turn away from Hinduism towards Buddhism. So that meaning is there in the title itself, but also is the evocation of Ramayana, Bhimayan, Ramayana. So in as we think about, let's say, Ram's story, Ramayan, Bhimayan. So it's Bhim's story. Obviously, the hint is that Bhim's story is also of those kinds of epic nature itself, but in a certain way it's a subversion of that epic itself, because if Ramayana is at the source and foundation of Hindu identity, then Bhimayan is about moving away from that Hindu identity, and that's what he says towards the end, that I'll not die a Hindu. That's what the book also tries to project, and his move away from Hinduism. So in a way that Bhimayan aims to be subversive of that narrative, an epic narrative of India itself. And through that we can also think about 2-3 other possibilities that are there. So one is the subversion of the Hindu epic itself. The second is also to think about this as an Indian English text which is also working on a canonical Indian myth then. And we have seen these kinds of adjustments, adaptations, right? So we read this kind of an adaptation in Bankim where he was trying to bring in the novel and he was laying it on top of Ramayana itself there also. The trope of abduction, that then coming back and ultimately not finding a space within the domesticities and finally ending outside the space of domesticity that we saw in Bankim, who was reworking it to suit the novel form. We can see that the Ramayana is being reworked here as an Indian English text in a graphic novel itself. So if on one hand it is a subversion of the Hindu identity of Ramayana and the Indian myth itself, trying to rework that myth through Bhimrao Ambedkar's own story. On the second level, it can be thought of as an Indian English text which works on, which adapts Indian myth itself. Also, it is interesting to think the kind of Dalit assertion that we can think about if we look at this comparison or a certain kind of a evocation of Ramayana that is there, that Bhimrao's story is also central or foundational to the Dalit identity itself. That Bhimrao is almost in that sense, this is Bhimayan, that's why. So it's Bhimrao's myth and legends which are at the center of Dalit assertion in India. So these many uh, these many connotations need to be paid attention to when we are thinking of Bhimayan. Also important is to think of Bhimayan as part of a large body of writing coming out of India now as Dalit writings. If we only think of Bhimayan as part of, let's say, graphic narratives from India, or graphic novels, if we think of it as contemporary literature from India or contemporary works from India in that genre, or we think of it as part of young adult fiction as we were thinking about in terms of comics and graphic novels from India, or we tend to think in terms of Indian writing in English. It is also important to think of it as part of Dalit writings that are coming out of India. Many of them come out in vernaculars of India and also in English. So we can think about like host of writers from Arjun Dangle, Namdev Dhasal, who is also quoted in this book, or like Sharan Kumar Limbale, who wrote about Dalit aesthetics, to contemporary writers like Yashika Dutt, whose book coming out as a Dalit talks about the contemporary struggles and negotiations of the Dalit itself, and or someone like Suraj Yangde, who discusses various, again, contemporary negotiations of the Dalit. So within that entire discourse of Dalit studies, one can see Bhimayan as a text also as a significant influence, where Bhimayan comes to occupy a central node there, because unlike many of these writings, it is a graphic novel. It is not an essay, it is not a novel, or it is a treatise on aesthetics or criticism itself. So this is again a very unique expression of Dalit writings itself. So one can also think about Bhimayan in those within that tradition itself, and that's a very powerful tradition of writing that is coming out from India, and that can also be read as part of Indian writing in English, because many of these writings are already translated into English or are written in English itself. So therefore we can read Bhimayan in multiple ways, and Bhimayan becomes a text which has these interconnected nodes through which it needs to be understood. One of the last things that we need to look at is the contribution of the Gond writers and their autobiography itself. So within this biography of Ambedkar also lies the autobiography of Ambedkar, and then also the autobiography of Subhash Vyam and Durgabai Vyam. So it's again a pictorial text of what happened. Hello Anandji, we are at it. Just a few more pages to be done. You may come this weekend, it will be ready. It tells us about how they are preparing the work, Durgabai and Subhash, and we are told about the art of Bhimayan. In a way, effort to not elide over or obscure the contribution of the artist who have done this. And this is a very important thing here, because one has to remember that here it is the tribals or tribal art which is being used for Dalits. As a book, there is a conscious attempt to not put them in the same basket. So, therefore, the fourth section talks about their own struggle, but also there is an attempt to show how solidarity is found among these two communities, the Dalits and the tribals. So we are told about Durgabai. I am Durga. I was born in Barbaspur village in eastern Madhya Pradesh. Near our village is Dhuti jungle, which is it's so called because it's structured like a bamboo fish basket. Here I am 10 years old listening to bedtime stories my grandmother tells me. Every morning I head to the Tudar river to wash, bathe and fetch water. I would sweep the yard and make a digna. Digna is what they make. As you can see on the walls, they are making the dignas here, and this is why this pattern becomes helpful to the graphic narrative. Here you can see the dignas helping mark the space. Otherwise, it would have gone all across, right? So, I would pat cows and dung into cakes, then off to the Tudar again to fetch more water, catch some fish, and with nets made of coarse cloth and collect firewood from Dhuti. And then we are also told about Subhash. I am Subhash. When Durga and I got married, we moved to my village Sanpuri, and here we made more dignas together on the walls for the festival occasions. These digna patterns that we have used to arrive at panels for the graphic book. We are told about this. So they also tell us that we now how they have adapted to modernity, that we do our paintings now on paper and canvas using fabric and acrylic colors. For the fine black and white lines, we use rotring pens. However, our aesthetic draws on our village experience. So, and then we are told about how they met Jangad Singh Shyam, who established modern Pardhan Gond art movement, and he's a central figure. And as you will see, the beginning of the book pays an obeisance towards him, that it is under him that they have prospered. And so they tell us that, for example, to fill spaces we use patterns like dhan, kodo mustard on Ambedkar's face, moa grass. The borders that frame the image are inspired by fences on the field, like on this page. So just like you will fence on the page itself. So thereby you can see very natural elements coming in. And as we were discussing, that here humans and non-humans are active participants in the entire scene of action. So thereby you will have many people contributing. So the page is not like divided or inert in certain ways, in certain spaces also. So you will see that everyone contributing, and you will see that the non-human being part of the tribal way of life. And that's what he says, that like how nature comes into art, and that's what modern Gond art is about, which is done by Jangad Singh Shyam. So he says that in Bhopal, initially I worked on odd jobs and I became familiar with the basics of print technology. Durga divided her time between household work and doing painting. Jangad, my brother-in-law, encouraged her, and we are told about their life in Bhopal. Jangad Jija and wife Naukushia invited many talented artists like us to the city, gave us shelter, helped us explore the world of contemporary art. They are the deep roots of a large tree. Subhash and I are the branches of the tree. We owe everything to them. And you can see the tree itself from Jangad and his wife. And these are Subhash and Durgabai. And you can see them being part of this Pardhan Gond movement that was there. And then something very interesting happens that they say was the reason they could personally identify with Bhim Rao's struggle, Bhimrao Ambedkar's struggle. When Anand approached me for the Ambedkar book, I suggested Subhash and I would do the work together. So we made several trips to Delhi and visited Bhopal, this thing. So on a visit to Navayana, Anand was not there and the landlady abused us and wouldn't let us go in. She said we looked like yokels. And if you remember, again, they are facing similar problems that Ambedkar had faced. That hurt us. Anand told us that told her that I was an artist who had published many books and had been to Frankfurt, but none of this made any difference to her. We were reminded of Ambedkar's plight in Baroda and could understand his hurt. So you can see how, while maintaining the distinction between the tribals and the Dalits, there is a sense of solidarity when it comes to the idea of shame itself. So what Durgabai and Subhash tell us here is that shame binds them together, and the shame that is inflicted by the Indian society in general, that they are called names like yokels, they are thrown out of the house, movement is difficult for them, people discriminate based on their looks, people discriminate without knowing their talents, and they don't care to know their talents itself. So in that way, Navayana tries to bring out Bhimayana as a site also of solidarity. Critics like Nandini Chandra and others have also highlighted the problem of doing that, where everyone is brought together and the distinctions and the dissimilarities and the particular struggles of there are not highlighted, or particularities tend to be obliterated. So some of the critics have highlighted those points also, that how this kind of a solidarity also is a complicated terrain. But in Bhimayana, you see the authors having taken that risk of bringing these voices together. The book ends with Anand's write-up on how the entire thing happened, and we have read a version of it through the interview itself. One important thing that he tells us about Jangar's legacy, and he tells us about how the Digna form came to be, that our art is khula, where the space for all to breathe. This was a defining moment. We are on to something that will define the conventions of the graphic book itself. We are told about the inception of the book itself, how all of it came by, and one of the things that he tells us is that how Durga and Subhash would use many different elements that were not part of the storyboard itself. So as they say, as he says, on several occasions, Durga and Subhash would introduce narrative elements, situation, characters not provided for the storyboard. So much so that close to 40% of the text and dialogues were generated and re-edited to suit the drawings. For instance, by page 82, a 9-horse and 4 furious faces. In the previous panel, the sister-in-law of Namdev for the first time blames the horses for tripping the cart and defends her kin. Durga says the horses would surely laugh at this. On page 66, Ambedkar's plight in Baroda is depicted like the oxen on the oil press, walking in circles and going nowhere. Each time you view a page in this book, you will discover new ways of seeing, new meanings, new pleasures, and fresh insights. So that is what we are talking about bringing in Gond art to the pages of graphic narratives, which bring in very new articulations. That's why new meanings emerge, because for example, this idea of the horses laughing, that someone fell down, right? So that's a very natural reaction for the horses. So you are not only thinking from Bhimrao's angle, where he is facing a plight and caste oppressions, but you are also thinking from the non-humans angle also. And that's also true when we looked at the elephant itself. When we are like, when the tube well, the hand pump is angry at young Bhim being denied water. So all those things tell us of how complex this work is, and which is being also recommended and highlighted by someone like John Berger, who understands that this evolves a kind of a new idiom. And that's what he says. This book offers a prophetic answer, and is this: replace the stage of history with a body of community, a body with long past and present of many voices, and a vision of the future. Reading the book and following its story, we enter this body, its bloodstream, its organs, its members. So no more rectangular framing or unilinear time, no more profiled individuals, instead a conference of corporeal experiences across generations, full of pain and empathy, nurtured by complicity and endurances that can outlive the market. So he says that the book has now set an example that how these kinds of stories can be told, that we are done with rectangular framing, unilinear time, we have many voices here, and you can feel the pain of people. You don't have just an individual story, it becomes a story of the collective itself, because as I said, these are not very individualized faces, all the faces almost are identical. So you understand that this is about everyone, and this is a collective struggle in that sense. So that's how it fashions a new idiom of Indian experience in that way, and that's a journey that Indian writing English has taken, that it has now ventured into very different and new domains, where it has found ways to not only talk about the mainstream but also people who have been sidelined, who have been oppressed, who have been marginalized.